What's up, family? I am going to do a little bit different video today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment on one of the blog posts that I made. And so basically, I made a blog post that is called What Christians Should Know About the Biblical Festivals. And we got a comment on there. And it's a good comment because I think a lot of people don't realize the nuances of some of the festivals and some of the things that that go on within the various texts, and we have multiple things going on in between the Torah and then also within the New Testament. So let's read the question first. It's a two-part question. First, it has to do with the festival of Passover, and then it also has to do with the festival of what some people call first fruits. And so let's take a look at this. The question is this. Actually, before we get started, whether you're listening to this on podcast or whether you are watching it on YouTube, please take time to stop and subscribe to my YouTube channel, or also like the podcast, because it actually helps. Okay, so let's go to the question. It says, is the Feast of Unleavened Bread synonymous with Passover? Okay, so let's stop right there for a few seconds. This has actually been kind of a debate within different circles, especially people who have started to celebrate the festival of Passover on a regular basis. And let's just go to the text. The reason why is because it seems as though the text tells us that Passover is separate from the festival of unleavened bread. In Leviticus 23, 4-8, it says, "These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, or between the evenings, is the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Lord." So it seems like we have two different things going on. "For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work." Okay, so the answer is yes, but the answer is also kind of. And the reason why is because, yes, Passover is synonymous with unleavened bread, and I'll show you why I believe that in a few seconds. However, at the same time, it is somewhat separate. Passover itself is the memorial of the day that the destroyer came in and passed over the houses of Israel. The festival of unleavened bread is the festival of their freedom from Egypt. So there is two different celebrations here. At the same time, by the time we get to the New Testament writers see these as synonymous. Well, at least one of them does, and we'll look at that in just a second. I think that it's okay to look at these as separate festivals. I also think it's okay to kind of lump them together because the two events go hand in hand. In other words, the Passover and the celebration of the angel passing over the houses of Israel is connected and cannot be disconnected from the Exodus from Egypt. And this gets into all sorts of prophecies of our own personal salvation and what Christ has done for us on the cross. With that said, I believe that there are actually 7 biblical festivals, and I think that God tends to use the number 7 in multiple different instances throughout the Word, and has modeled 7 within the ebb and flow of life. Obviously, we have like 7 days to our week. On the 7th day is a Sabbath. I think that's actually important when we get into festivals like Sukkot. And so I think that there are actually 7 technically festivals within the biblical cycle. So let's count them. We have Passover, which is a Sabbath, and then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And on the 7th day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, we have another Sabbath. So that right there I see as 2 Sabbaths or holy convocations, which I would say are actually 2 festivals. And then we have Pentecost or Shavuot, which is the giving of the Torah, and this is the 3rd one. And then we have Yom Teruah, or the Day of Trumpets, which is our 4th one. Then we have the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, which is the 5th one. Then we have, and this is a little bit odd, but we have 7 days of Sukkot, or booths. And in the text, it's really interesting because it talks about living in booths for 7 days, and then it says, and on the eighth day. And this is really the only time that we have an eighth day within our festival cycle. And this represents, as I've written in my article that I just posted, my blog post, on what Christians should know about the biblical festivals. This is, I talk about this being a picture of eternity. And so the eighth day is also a Sabbath. You have a first day of Sukkot and eighth day of Sukkot, which are both Sabbaths. And so right there we have 7 Sabbaths, which I think are 7 festival times within God's festival season. Okay, so how did Israel view these festivals? Were Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread separate? Well, let's go to the Gospels. In Mark 14:1, Mark seems to separate them. He says, it was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So it seems as though they're separate. However, the question could be asked, is he using them interchangeably, or is he separating them? And it's really kind of ambiguous. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. So this is leading up to Christ's execution. So we have the same kind of text in Luke 22. And I'm going to read 3 different verses. I'm going to read verse 1 and then 7 and 8. Because by the time Luke writes, and we should kind of understand the timeline, I believe Mark is the first gospel writer to write his account. There's reasons I believe this, and you can find this in my article on what language were the synoptic gospels written in. I talk about who wrote first. So I think Mark wrote first. And then you have Luke probably wrote third. So it goes Mark wrote first, then Matthew, then Luke. So how much farther along the timeline is Luke from Mark? Not sure. But at the same time, it's close enough that this really, something hasn't changed drastically where the festival is all wrapped up into one with Luke, but not with Mark. So this is around the same time period for sure. And listen to what Luke says. He says, now the Feast of Unleavened Bread drew near, which is called the Passover. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which, now this is verse 7, and then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had been sacrificed. Now, if you have studied the biblical festivals a little bit, you know that the Passover lamb was sacrificed on the 14th of Nisan, which was leading into the Passover. And the 15th, which is the Sabbath or the Holy Convocation, is actually that's the Sabbath day. So that's the festival that you're celebrating in Passover. But the lamb itself was actually sacrificed on the 14th. And so the 14th is called the Passover. And I've talked about this actually in my article on the chronology of the Passover, which you can find on Growing in Messiah, and then under the Resources tab. If you just click on Resources, you can find that article in there. But it seems as though, basically the point here is that Luke seems to muddle these two together. In other words, he sees them as one festival, or at least he calls them that. He doesn't see 2 festivals here, or if he does, they're not really distinct. It's kind of all wrapped into one. Okay, so I know that's probably not a satisfying answer for the person who is asking, but I think the answer is yes, we can see them as synonymous with each other. They can't be separated from each other. However, if we're counting, there's 2 Sabbaths. There's a Sabbath on the Passover, which is actually the 15th, and then we get into what is called the Passover, and I believe that there's actually 5 different terms or 5 different things that are called the Passover. I talk about this in the same article that I just referenced on the chronology of the Passion. And so we get into kind of what is the Passover? Is the Passover on the 14th? Is it on the 15th? The answer is yes, to both, kind of. Anyway, so I hope that kind of clears it up. The answer is yes and no. It does seem to be separate, but it's also synonymous with each other. Okay, so let's go to the second part of this question. The commenter says, is there also a Feast of First Fruits? How are these explained? I always get confused. Yeah, the Feast of First Fruits is actually a really confusing one, and maybe not because of the biblical text so much, but possibly because of people who have attempted to celebrate first fruits. I'm putting quote marks around that for people who are listening on podcast format. Um, Possibly because of the people who are celebrating first fruits in our modern time. But the biblical text is not super clear on this, and I'll show you why. If you're reading your English Bible, this is what it says. It says, "Speak to the people of Israel." By the way, I'm in Leviticus 23 again, verses 10 through 17. "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you and reap its harvest, you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, so that you may be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." Okay, so we got to stop right here. Now, there's a huge debate on this, and people who have studied this will obviously know already. But the question is what day are they talking about? They're talking about either the day after the festival Sabbath, which would be the 16th of Nisan, or they're talking about the day after the weekly Sabbath, and that's what the Sadducees celebrated. So the Pharisees celebrated after the 15th on the 16th of Nisan, and the Sadducees celebrated after the Sabbath day within the Passover week. Okay, but that's not actually the what we're trying to focus on here. The question is that day? Let's just pretend for a few seconds. We're going to, for ease of use, we're going to say that people are going to celebrate this on the 16th of Nisan. Is that the festival of first fruits? Because the text says that people reap their harvest and they bring the first fruits in. It says, "You shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest." Okay. Yes, it says that you bring the first fruits in to the priest on this day, which is the first day of what is called the Omer. The Omer was a measurement, and you would bring an omer of barley and your sheaf in and give it to the priest. Okay, they would count the Omer, and they would do this all the way up until the next festival, which is Pentecost. And so this is called the first fruits, not the day itself. And this is important. Not the day itself. The first counting of the Omer is not called first fruits. However, the offering that is brought in is called first fruits. So let's read it one more time. It says, "When you come into the land that I give you and reap its harvest, you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf offering before the Lord, so that you may be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it." Okay, let's keep going. "And on the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb, a year old, with blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the grain offering with it shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, a food offering to the Lord with a pleasing aroma. And the drink offering with it shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. And you shall eat neither bread nor grain, parched or fresh, until this same day." Which is also interesting, because if this is within the Passover festival, then it has to be unleavened bread, right? Because according to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, you can't eat any bread with leaven in it. Okay, anyway, let's keep going. "Until you have brought the offering of your God. It is a statute forever through your generations in all your dwellings. You shall count 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath. From the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th day." Okay, and what day is that? That's Pentecost. So now the text is going to switch, and we're going to talk about this day, Pentecost. "Then you shall present a grain offering of new grain to the Lord. You shall bring from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread to be waved, made of 2/10 of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven as first fruits to the Lord." So according to the biblical text, really the day of first fruits is in fact Pentecost. It's not the first day of counting the Omer. It's in fact the day of Pentecost. This is what we would consider the festival or the feast of first fruits. And this is how it's referred to in Judaism. The day of Pentecost, or what we call Shavuot in Hebrew, or what people sometimes call the Feast of First Fruits, is in fact that day. It's the day after you count 50 days. However, within modern times, especially within the rise of Christians who are celebrating the biblical feasts, what we are seeing is, in fact, people calling the first day of counting the Omer, which is the day that we bring the first fruits in for the first time, people are calling that the festival of first fruits. This, however, is never called a festival. It's not a Chag within within the biblical text. It's not a Sabbath. It's not a holy convocation. It seems like the only thing that's different is that we start to count the Omer. And this is different because we have specific sacrifices that happen on this day. So within the temple, this was a kind of a bigger day because we had extra sacrifices than normal. And even within the New Testament text, we see that the term mega Sabbath or a great Sabbath, it was a great Sabbath when Yeshua was on the cross. The next day was a great Sabbath. I think that that's because it was the first day of counting the Omer, and there were a lot more sacrifices, and that's why they call it a great Sabbath. So to answer the question, no, the festival, there is such thing as the festival of first fruits. However, it's what people commonly refer to as Pentecost. It's not the day, the first day of counting the Omer. So I hope that I've kind of explained that and made it clear. However, it should be noted that a lot of times within our modern times, Christians and people within the Messianic movement and the Hebrew roots movement tend to refer to the first day of counting the Omer as the festival of first fruits. So that's why there's a lot of confusion around what day this is and whether or not there's actually a feast of first fruits. Okay. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I hope that you've gained something from it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel if that's where you're watching this. If you're not watching it on YouTube, if you're listening to this on podcast, then I would encourage you to like the podcast and tell other people about it. All right, thanks so much, and I will see you next time here on Growing in Messiah.